Well, good morning all, and welcome to another edition of our mini dash training sessions. Today's topic is actually going to be, again, another slight programming note. When we started the digital dash, several agencies submitted the check. The optimized system referred to as all data table summaries contain text. However, the summary element is really no longer used for tables, and Optimize has removed this check from their system in favor of other table-related accessibility checks. So today we're going to be doing things a little bit differently. We're still going to touch on this topic, but the title of this presentation is really more appropriately named Tables, Captions, and Summaries. And so here's the reason why. The WCAG guidelines around tables have not changed over the years. The way that we build websites have evolved. And so as a result, some of the checks that are being done and that may have been relevant in the past are now obsolete. And there's new, better ways of testing WCAG criteria. So today's presentation, we're going to be focused the first of three different sections on tables. And we're going to go over a couple of the checks today. In fact, I believe we've got 5 different checks that we're going to touch on today. If this was one of the checks that your agency submitted and you're no longer seeing it, it's because the check, really that check was removed and it was replaced with different checks. But hopefully by the end of today, you'll understand how to update, optimize, review these, and make sure that your tables are accessible. So with that, again, as usual, with time constraints, we ask you to please post all the questions in the meeting chat. This will help us make sure we provide accurate answers to you, and we'll get those sent out to everyone who attended today, and as well as post them in the digital accessibility chat space. We are also recording today's session and we'll post it to our YouTube page later this afternoon. So because this is a big session and big topic today, I will get right started on it. So a moment ago, I said that the WCAG guidelines have not changed, but the ways we build websites have evolved in recent years. So what has not changed? The guidelines themselves, the underlying principle that content on a website must be perceivable to all visitors. It's still the same. It needs to be adaptable to support the assistive technologies that visitors use, meaning that the behind the content, the meaning behind the content must be kept regardless of how that content is consumed, whether it's through a browser, a screen reader, or for the deaf and blind, a braille device. All of that information and the structure has to be available to people. So the WCAG principle that we're concerned about here is 1.3.1, which is information and relationships is defined as the information, structure, and relationships that are conveyed through presentation can also be programmatically determined and are available in text. So that's kind of a really technical standard, but as we go through this, the main point is that when we are providing information, but not only is the information important, but sometimes the structure and the relationships between different information is also important. So if you think about most tables, all 3 of those elements are present. So what has evolved? And I'm going to try really hard to not fall into the technical side of this as we go through. So I, again, post questions in the chat if I fail at that. But the main thing that's changed over the years is the way we build websites. We now separate out the presentation layer, or the way we define how something looks, from the content layer, which is the content, the meaning, and the structure. And this is one reason why a lot of what we're doing in the digital dash is focused primarily on that content and not the technical stuff that happens behind the scenes on how it gets presented. So in the past, we used to use tables for everything. When the web first started up, we would use it for both conveying meaning and for controlling the layout of the page. And I'm sure everybody has used Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets simply to control the layout of content as opposed to the intended purpose of a spreadsheet program, which is formulas and calculations and numbers. And that's how we started off with the web as well. But over the years, this has evolved, and now we've split out how we separate the presentation and the content. And so the language, programming languages that we use, the HTML code is really now used for conveying meaning. And for presentation and for style, we use CSS elements. And so even though we try to avoid using tables now solely for layout, because of that, certain things in the way we build the tables have changed. We really no longer use the summary attribute for true data tables. Instead, we use the caption element. So let me dive in a little bit more into tables, captions, and summaries, and hopefully some of these changes will make some sense. While we're doing it, I mentioned that there's about 5 different checks that we're going to be talking about. The primary one, all data table summaries contain text. That should have been removed from your optimized system right now, but if it's not, as we go through, it'll make sense on what you need to do to clear that out. There's a check for table captions, identifying the table. If the summary attribute is still used, there's a couple of checks that you have to make sure to follow if it's still used. And if the table is used for layout as opposed to conveying meaning, there's 2 checks there. We shouldn't be using summary attributes or caption elements layout tables. So we'll kind of dive into that here in a moment. First, let's talk about tables. I mentioned there's 2 different types of tables, data tables versus layout tables. So the primary thing we're concerned about is going to be data tables. These are tables that convey meaning, that the way they're built preserves the relationships of the information inside of it. They certainly can be very simple or they can be very complex. But to truly be accessible, a table needs a caption and it must contain table header elements. And I'll show you what those look like here in our examples. The other type of table is a layout table. Those are simply about controlling the placement of the content. So they shouldn't have captions. They shouldn't have table headers. Now, it's not an accessibility problem to use layout tables. It's just an obsolete way of doing things. The preferred method is to use a CSS style sheet based method, but it's not an accessibility problem to have it. So let's look at the examples. So this example here, this is what I mean by a data table. There's a header across the top. There's data that's aligned in each of those rows that match up with the header at the top. There's specific meaning that this table is communicating. And if we were to move various cells around in the table, that meaning would get lost. But there's relationships that are being communicated into this table. And you'll also see I have a caption there at the bottom. All text for images. There are some differences about that we'll get into, but the key thing here is we have a caption that is helpful both for sighted users and for assistive technologies to understand what this table is about. And the caption on this page is showing at the bottom. Technically in the code, the caption comes right before the table. And if you were to inspect this particular table, you would see that there. But so this is what a data table looks like. And this is the different type of table, the layout table. Again, the guidelines don't prohibit the use of layout tables, but you'll notice there's really no specific meaning that the table is trying to communicate. There's no relationships that have to be preserved. You could move those different things around into different spots on that table, and it wouldn't change the purpose of the table. It's simply a way of presenting the data. So For these types of tables, if you are using a layout table, there should not be a header at the top because really there is no relationships to help define, and there shouldn't be a caption underneath it. Because again, we often see these things like on a landing page or on a sales page where you're clicking on links and you want to look at specific categories of things. But if I move sweetener down to the bottom middle and cut spoons up to the top right, there would be no change in how that information is conveyed and what it means to the user. So because of the way that we've now changed how tables are used, we're also changing some of the elements that are used to help describe tables. One of the things that has come about is we now use something called the caption element. That's the element that we should be using on data tables. A caption is different from a summary. They're two different types of things. Captions function like a heading for the table. It helps to provide context to the table. It makes it understandable. And most importantly, captions are visible to both sighted users and assistive technologies, whereas a summary is always hidden visibly from sighted users. So when you add a summary to a table, you won't actually see it on the page. Only assistive technology will, whereas the caption element is visible. The summary attribute, and I know I'm using the terms element and attribute kind of interchangeably right here. Technically, in programming language, HTML, attributes and elements are different. I'm trying to be very careful to always say summary, the table summary attribute, because there is a different summary element. It's one of the confusing things. For our purposes, it doesn't matter. The main thing is we really should not be using that table summary attribute anymore. Alternate text, the point of the summary originally was the alternate text to summarize the table. But again, it's not visible to users. If it is being used, and it really should only ever be used on data tables and not layout tables at all, but if the summary element is being used, it should not duplicate information that's present in the caption. It should be different. Otherwise, for assistive technology, it's going to read both the caption and the summary, and the user would be getting both the same thing repeated. So let's dive in on how to fix this and what to look for. The first thing that we have to do is actually look at the table. We need to review it, determine if it's a data table or a layout table. Is it trying to convey any meaning, structure, or relationships? If what you're looking at, the table that you're looking at, is a data table and it has those, then there's two things we need to check for. One, does it have a caption that identifies the table? If it doesn't have a caption, add the caption. If it does, go back and mark the check, table captions identify the table, and mark that as reviewed. Two, check to see if there's a summary. Most websites, you're not going to have to worry about this. If you're on the agency platform and you're using one of the websites ASET provides, you should not have a summary attribute. Our screens, our visual editor screens do not allow you to create that summary attribute. You could always right click on it and get rid of it, as you saw it there. But just verify if the attribute is removed or is used, that it doesn't duplicate the caption element. In Optimize, if you're seeing both the table captions identify the table and table summaries do not duplicate the captions, you probably have both elements that are visible on the screen or within the code. And so you'll have to look at that summary element to see. Oops, sorry, I did not want to embarrass on me there. Layout tables, on the other hand, when you see a layout table, there's two things you need to make sure of. One, you got to make sure there's no caption elements or summary attributes. Those things have been removed. and there should not be any headers. And any of those kind of properties are removed. Allow you to mark the layout tables don't contain captions, layout tables don't contain summary attributes. So let me show you real quick the page. I do apologize. I know I'm supposed to be done. So here's these. And if I click on the edit button of these pages, it better go fast for me today. You can see the code's going to flash there, but all I need to do, you don't need to look at the code and make changes. I can go to my table properties and I've got a headers value on this one. And obviously every site's going to be slightly different, but I would want to set this to none. If this was simply a layout table, I would want to get rid of any types of stripings and borders. And I would also want to delete the caption in the bottom. But because this is a data table, I need to include my caption, and I need to either define the first row as column, or the first row as a header, or the first column as a header, or both. In more complex tables, they may both be important headers defining what's in those cells. So in this case, it was only the first row that mattered. And I'm just going to leave it like that for now. And then on a layout table, if it was something like this, again, same thing. I'm just going to check to make sure there's no headers and no caption. So I could mark both of these items here as passing right now. We're going to cover more on the topic of data tables and some of the checks that are involved related to it in our next session. So hopefully I explained this well. If not, I'm going to keep the chat open. If you have any questions, please post those questions in the chat. And I've already posted all of the resources from today's session into the chat. I want to thank everybody for attending. And I'm sorry I went a couple of minutes over, but thank you for joining us this morning. Good luck on reviewing your tables.